We'll take care of that.
In the last episode of University Debating and Literary Club's series, Women of Words. The journey was really interesting for us. We heard from Nivedita Menon ma'am, then we heard from Rana Safi ma'am about her understanding of the grandeur of Shah Jahanabad. From Huma Khalil ma'am in our third episode, we heard the poetic journey of Aligarh. And now, of course, today, in this ultimate session of the series, we would be hearing from another Ali, Taran Khan ma'am, on her book Shadow City. So I welcome you all. We have Professor F.S. Shirani, who will be joining us soon. And we have Dr. Sada Farid ma'am, President, University Debating and Literary Club, who have been extremely supportive throughout the series. And of course, our UDLC team is to be credited with the success of this series. So today's session will be moderated by Urusa Api, and she has also been a driving force to this series. I request for the audience is that if they have any queries, please drop them in the chat box, and we will try to take them in the end. With this, I would request Dr. Sadaf Farid ma'am for the welcome address.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Raza. So, as we all know that books carry an entire world in themselves. They present culture, art, traditions, values, and ethics of various civilizations. One such book is Taran Khan's Shadow City, A Woman Walks Kabul. It unfolds the city of Kabul in front of us and brings to us many shades of that city. It is our privilege that Mr. Khan is on behalf of the University Debating and Literary Club and on my personal behalf. I welcome her and express my heartfelt thanks to Mr. Khan for accepting our invitation. We look forward to an academic feast from an outstanding writer that she is. A very warm welcome, Ms. Khan.
Thank you, ma'am. And I'm sure this will be an interesting session. Now I'd request Urusa Api to please take forward the session.
Hello all. Hello, Taranappa. Hello, ma'am. And so good to see us all gathered here. So before we begin, there is a little exercise that I want to do. And it will also serve as a recap for those who have read the book and a little bit of a summary for those who haven't. So I'm going to hold a rapid fire round for Taranappa, and I'm going to throw some names at her, and she has to choose whether she prefers India or Afghanistan. So this is going to be a difficult one, but surely an interesting one. And it is not a competition of what is better, but of what is more impressionable. So first off, landscape.
Okay, this is really difficult now, sir.
Well, you could choose both, but that would just take the fun away.
Just to start, I want to say thank you very much to all of you for inviting me to this session. It's really special to be in Aligarh virtually. And this is a lovely exercise. See, I can see some old friends here. At least I can see their play pictures, their names, titles. So thank you for turning up. Okay, landscape. Definitely both. Sorry to be boring, but
okay, flora.
I would say again. I would say both because they're both so stunning.
Okay.
This might happen to all your questions. I'm sorry.
Okay, weather.
Weather. So the weather in Kabul was. I don't enjoy the cold very much, but in the winters it was actually really beautiful. I hadn't expected to see winter like this, and I had seen snow earlier. There's no snow in Aligarh, as you know. So for an Aligarh girl like me, watching the snowfall outside our home was really, really special.
Okay. Cuisine.
Again, both, but I would say, again, there is a lot more to the food in Kabul than people know of. And I know there are some sort of preconceptions that Afghan food is very bland, it's sort of very one-tone, there is no range to the flavors. It's true that it's not spicy, but it is really delicious. And there's a huge range of food. There are some similarities with Indian food, like the pulao. I thought was really similar to what I like to eat at home. Uh, so I would say they're complementary to each other. Different
Okay.
kinds of food for different kinds of moods.
Definitely, definitely. Then wedding.
Again, opulence in both spaces. In the Afghan weddings that I was lucky enough to see, um, definitely a different kind from Indian weddings. A lot more, a lot more sort of just desire to embrace the moment and to really enjoy what's going on. But again, a lot of similarities in the sense of closeness to families, to the whole idea of family being a much larger group than for many people from other parts of the world. The idea of a family being a huger range. I thought that felt really close. But I have to say, when I was wearing sort of my Indian clothes to Afghan weddings, it was noticeably strange. In fact, some people would point when I was introduced. They would say, she's not from here. So they had the need to explain to the people in the hall why I wasn't dressed similarly in a more beautiful, opulent way.
Of course. Okay. Fashion.
Perhaps not the best person to comment on this, but again, very, very advanced in Kabul, very different in other parts of Afghanistan. But I think there was a very definite sense of style among men and women both in Kabul when I saw. Again, this was something I hadn't really anticipated, and it was this nice mix of elements where you could have some Indian clothes, some, maybe a style from Iran, maybe something from Turkey. You could see it all together. I'm sorry, I'm not answering your question in choosing
No, it's
between
fine,
the
but you're
two.
giving us so much more. You're giving us so much more. Then love stories.
Oh, very similar. And very, very interesting. A lot of what I heard in Kabul reminded me so much of stories in Aligarh in India. And I think that's really prepared me to be open to all the different ways in which love and romance manifest, more beyond a sort of a very constricted worldview of what does love look like, what does romance look like. I think having grown up in Aligarh, having grown up in India, and having had grandparents like mine, I was more open to seeing romance manifest itself in the everyday life of the city.
I think it is something we all can agree on because it is universal, truly. Love stories, you find them everywhere.
It is, and yet at the same time, when I would describe my book to people or talk about it while I was writing it, and I would say, well, there's a chapter on love and romance, that always raised eyebrows, But like you say, of course, it's everywhere. Why wouldn't it be?
And now, finally, poetry.
It's so shared, Urusa, which is the whole point of a lot of what I covered in the book is how much in common we have. Everything you mentioned, essentially, the book is about how much all of this is shared. And I think this is something important that I came to recognize over the time I spent in Kabul, and also something really precious to me that I learned a large part through my grandfather, my Nana, was this is something which is part of the whole cultural arc that connects India and Afghanistan and this entire region. Poetry is definitely one of the strongest links we have, like the Shahnameh, like Ghalib. People in Kabul would quote Ghalib's poetry to me, Farsi poetry, or Iqbal's poetry. Bedil was something my grandfather loved Bedil's poetry. He would quote that sitting in Aligarh. So this is all really shared terrain between the two places.
Okay, so that I hope this helped the audience. And now we will get to the discussion. So, stories make people and people make places. Shadow City, A Woman Walks Kabul is a story of stories. It peers into the lives of Afghans, dead and alive, exploring their everyday struggle and how it all contributes to the formation of a bigger narrative. This book is about the Afghani sentiment, their values, their dreams, their disappointments, and their perseverance towards a promising future. How far it is, none of us know. So now my first question for you is, this book is made of metaphors. Its contemplative prose captures the nuances of a place familiar yet unfamiliar to many. In fact, your narrations of Afghans sometimes displays a hint of taken away just as much as it has offered. After having spent a significant amount of time in Kabul, would you say that the land treats its outsiders just the way it has dealt with its natives? And was your encounter with Kabul an acquaintance or friendship? Oh, you are unmuted. We cannot hear
Sorry,
you.
I said that's a really interesting question, and you can tell that it's coming from a literature student, of course. But thank you for reading the book so carefully, Urusa. I think when I went to Kabul, I already went with a feeling of imagined proximity because I felt close to the city for a variety of reasons. Once I got there, my grandfather, who lived in Aligarh, he introduced the city to me in a number of ways, which were really unexpected for me. And I think this is really key to how I connected to Kabul. I can only talk about my experience, but I can't see you anymore. You vanished somewhere. Anyway, so yeah, so the point is that you can sort of, every city I think reveals itself depending on the paths you take into it. And for me, Kabul shifted shape over the years in which I kept going back, I kept discovering new layers. I would spend some time there, I would come back to Aligarh, I would tell my grandfather about something I had seen or heard there, and he would then tell me other things about the city that he knew, and he had never been to Kabul. He had never visited except through reading, through poetry, through music, through cultural references, through history, and he knew it really intimately. I think this was for me learning in terms of how can you inhabit a city? Even when you're there, you may not know it very well, which was unfortunately the way a lot of people came to experience Kabul, which was through living in compounds, going out only in cars, never really walking, which was almost the first thing I was told when I got there was don't ever walk. And of course, then I did, and it was a very different relationship that I formed with the city because I tried to explore it on foot, and it's a relationship of intimacy. You hear things, you smell things, you catch glimpses of life in a way you can't in a different way. And I think, so there was all of that. There was my grandfather's story about Kabul. There were the people who I was working with and I was sharing my living spaces with and their families because they opened up their lives to me. They told me their stories. They took me around their version of the city. All of these combined to give me an insight into the city that I think I was very fortunate to get and that I would definitely not have got if I'd gone in a different way, if I hadn't had this engagement with ordinary Kabulis. So really, I think the idea of being an insider or an outsider is a little blurry for me. I mean, I'm definitely not from Kabul, but I felt a sense of belonging to it. I felt a sense of proximity to it, thanks to the people who I was with, who could show me around, and even the people who were not there, but who had the sense of connection to this city, like my granddad.
Thank you for the beautiful answer. I mean, of course, your grandfather's description of Afghanistan really did make me feel that he has been a part of it in some places. And at one time, I had been disillusioned. I have been, in fact, illusioned into thinking that I belong to Afghanistan in some or the other way, even if it is through the book. So for the next question, this book is made up of metaphors. Its contemplative prose captures the nuances of a place familiar. Oh my, I'm so sorry, I'm going to the second question now. Throughout the book, you have discussed Kabul and Aligarh in parallel, as if interweaving two pieces of fabric across their familiar points to create a tapestry. A tapestry of books, poems, love stories, films, weddings, and the words of your Baba. You've also spoken the idea of a home and how it can exist even within one's imagination. So would you say that the book describes a haven, a third space, where time, space, and temperaments coincide, a home that you can always trace your steps back to.
Yeah, so the idea of home is deeply tied to the idea of gurbat, which is sense of exile or a sense of being away from home. I think just so for the people who haven't had the chance to read the book or who don't want to read the book, which is also fine. The entire structure of the book is each chapter takes you through a different part of the city. So there is one chapter which talks about books and reading, which starts because I forgot to pack any books with me when I went from India, and I started looking for books in Kabul. And people said, you won't find them here. And of course, there were books there. It was just a matter of where you looked and what kind of books you were looking for. So ऐसे ही हर chapter में I've ended up finding something different in a different physical space. Like the idea of walking through graveyards and memorials in Kabul. So there are physical graveyards, but there are also ways to remember the many losses that the city had gone through, which were not so obvious, but they were in a sense marking the absence of people. For example, in someone's home, there would be a photograph of a relative who had vanished in the 70s and had never been seen or heard of again, and they didn't know what had become of him. This is also in a way a memorial. It's also in a way a monument to loss. So each chapter takes one theme, one space, and it wanders through these kind of ideas, also using memory, also using mythology, so the physical spaces and also the temporal spaces of the city. All of this together, I think, created a very strong sense of the city existing made up of people. And once the city, and the thing with Kabul is that, and what we've seen recently is the last 40 years of war have led to waves of displacement, and the most recent change in August will also lead to massive displacement. Again, already within the country, there are internally displaced people that you see living in Kabul. There is a humanitarian crisis and so on. All of this has made it very difficult to say where do people locate home. There were so many people who came back after 2001 wanting to settle down. Before that, they had lived as refugees. They are once again facing a future as refugees. I think this is what I learned in Kabul, how precarious this idea of home can be, and how it can sort of move with you, which is what my grandfather has also said, that maybe home is a place where you just feel whole, and that could be anywhere.
That's true. That's very accurate. And for somebody like me who has lived in different places all her life, I feel to find an ideal home somewhere that we can always belong to, it could only exist in the imagination, because it's not physically possible. So thank you for creating a home for all of us in that book. And since you spoke of people and how they have been living layers of lives because of the rich history of Kabul, especially its political history. So that brings us to the next question. That you write that culture can be obliterated not just by war, but also by simply looking away. Afghanistan has a history of cultures layered upon the other, crossing boundaries and inflecting new changes among its people. So, throughout the book, I can sense the native stone between Western modernity and local tradition, sharing a love and hate relationship. It appears more overt because of my own indirect experience of belonging to a post colonial nation. So, how far would you say the Afghans have succeeded in reconciling that dilemma?
I don't think it's that simple, actually, between these two tugs. There's so much complication within the lived experiences of Afghans, within the many shades of what we call modernity. I think it's a lot more complicated, the interplay. And I think maybe a more accurate way of describing the changes of what I saw 2006 to 13 was the period in which I spent in Kabul. And this was the time which moved from the 70s to the 80s. And this was the time when the city was very much in flux. There was a lot of being a time of relative hope right after the Taliban was overthrown in 2001, and there was hope for a time of peace and stability. Up until 2013 was when the NATO forces formally ended their combat operation in Afghanistan. And this was a time, I think what we saw at this time was a transformation of the city in many, many different ways, which, some of them were very obvious physical changes. For instance, the topography of the city changed. There were far more security apparatus over the years. When I was walking through, I would see a familiar street would suddenly have vanished because there would be a security barricade there. Ekdam se there would be like a huge concrete wall, and behind that there would be familiar sites. There would be secure checkpoints and so on. So this was one aspect. Then physically also the city became bigger and bigger. It spread beyond the traditional limits of the mountains within which it used to be encircled. There were new colonies being made. So things were changing, pretty much all the time. And what was also happening is that people who earlier had lived as refugees abroad were able to come back, build their own homes, settle down, and and they could imagine a life for themselves in Kabul. So I would say it was a really, it was a time when, of course, many things were happening. It would be difficult to say it was all positive or all negative, but certainly it was change of a kind that was quite rapid, and that changed the city quite fundamentally, I think.
Okay, so we are talking of change, and we are talking of how lives in Afghanistan have changed. So that brings us to the next question. And a majority of Afghan livelihood and infrastructural development is dependent on foreign aid. As pointed out in the book, there were pages and pages of, I would just come across this development, that development, and even history is trapped in the book through foreign aid, and of course in Afghanistan. So in fact, the city owes its rehabilitation, albeit short-lived, to international financial and volunteer aids. So you've also mentioned the poppy places, media houses, foreign contractors, and movies making profit out of war and displacement. Would you say that Afghanistan, in its peril, has become a career for foreigners, or that its dependency on outside help has crippled it?
So of course now all this is, all in the past, and things are completely different now for Afghanistan since the Taliban took over on August 15th. I think these are all things which what I'm describing and what I've described in the book is a certain period in the history of Kabul. And, I hope that there is it has value in the sense that it serves as a memory of that time and that era in the city. Memory is such a tricky thing in a city like Kabul, because I think what I found was that, of course, war obliterates memory. But in this case, even the years of peace had obliterated the memory of Kabul, as one of my friends had pointed out, that it felt like there had been nothing but war in Kabul, which is true of the last 40 years. But also it is equally true that this is a city with a complicated cosmopolitan past. And I think what you're referring to is also one thread in that whole saga. And certainly the dependence on foreign aid is well documented. It's extremely high. It comes with its own share of problems, which is what we're seeing now. As I mentioned, there's a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. There's a huge number of internally displaced people who have sought refuge in the capital. It's going to be a harsh winter. So, these are all associated problems coming from the high dependence on foreign aid. But, I would say that it would be really difficult to sort of slot that into an easy categorization of history as this one period, because so many things happen within this period that it doesn't really make sense for me to describe it as one thing.
Of course. Ambiguity is where all our answers lie. So you have described the essence of Kabul in metaphors and seasons. So this is like my favorite part, where we really get into the metaphors that you've used throughout the book. And I personally enjoyed each one of them. Each chapter is a metaphor in itself. made up of many metaphors, and then they speak of events of people's lives. So you have described Kabul in spring and winter. Spring is the beautiful part, the peace, and winter is the violence. So while reading, you also mentioned that and the reader should not be too indulged in the romantic descriptions, because that would take us far away from the purpose of what this book is trying to convey. So your literary tone in the book is laced with both admiration and agony for Afghanistan. So in the present, now that Afghanistan has been yet again overtaken by a new government, how do you think that affects the seasons of Afghanistan, the metaphorical season of Afghanistan? Do you think that the new political situation holds the potential to disperse the air of inevitability that surrounds the nation and its people?
So, interesting thing about the metaphors is that until you had described it, I had not thought of it like that. So, thank you for adding a layer to my book. I would say that actually every season is beautiful in Afghanistan. Winter has its own beauty and has a very spare beauty. Again, like I said, I love watching the snow. And I think for many Kabulis I spoke to, they described coming back after years of living as refugees or some sort of displacement or a sense or a long journey, coming back to Kabul, watching the snowfall, and that's what really made them feel they'd come home. Like that was the moment when they said, "I'm home. This is what Kabul is for me." Even when, and so many people I speak to now who live abroad, say in Canada, and Canada has a lot of snow, but they keep saying that it's not the same. It's not the same as Kabul snow. So there is a very particular sense of attachment to, I think, the winter especially, and the snowfall in Kabul for the people who belong there. About the, I mean, I haven't been back to Kabul since 2013, and I'm not, qualified to give political opinions on what's going on. I can really just hope that the situation doesn't develop into the kind of full-blown civil war, the kind of internecine fighting, the street battles that were really common during the civil war in Kabul, which was 1992 to 1996. I think that's a huge fear. And also, again, the dimensions of the humanitarian crisis are really worrying. I don't know how it will end. I don't know what will be the ending of this. But my concern is really for, of course, for the Afghan people and for the people who are living in that country, who have no, who really have no other way but to continue living in that country.
So we could say that this is in a way losing Afghan, so that we can find it once again in a new essence, in a new atmosphere, and then we can give new meaning to Kabul and let it give us new meaning on how it describes itself. So thank you for that. Now let's discuss the three fantasies of Afghans canvassed in the textbook, in the text: books, movies, and opium. So there are particular chapters dedicated to the discussion of this, and my favorite was Walking with the Jinns. It was a very impactful and chapter, and it really made my heart very heavy because of the volumes it spoke about the Afghans. So each of these have merry and solemn sides to them, and there is no guarantee of a balance between the two. So with the Afghan indulgence in the three fantasies, would you categorize them as a denial of and escape from reality, or a longing for what could be?
I think the point when I was getting into each of these chapters, Urusa, was really the fact that when you write about Kabul or when you read about Kabul, you tend to sort of go between two extremes or two shades of emotion. So one used to be, again, this is all stuff from, maybe it's applicable now as well, actually. But you kind of go from reading about stories of suffering and war and great sadness, and you go to stories of people who sort of endure despite war, people who managed to hold on to hope, or who managed to, to do things despite great odds. And I think both these are sort of equally easy to, take issue with. Maybe they're both equally, I would say the life falls in between both these positions. And this was important for me to recognize. I think it was a huge learning for me. It seems very obvious when you say it, that life is a mix of different emotions in Kabul as it is elsewhere. And having recognized that, my attempt throughout the book was to write this, precisely this, the very complicated intermix of feelings of past and present, of hope and sadness, the many, many shades which make all our lives. And part of my attempt through the book was to help people, or to let readers inhabit this space with their own imaginations. So, for instance, like you said, I didn't want to give a very romantic picture of Kabul, but at the same time, the fact that there is romance in Kabul was also important to mention. Again, the whole intense prevalence of drug use in Kabul, it's also a fallout, I think, of 40 decades of war, of violence, of being habituated to violence. The links between the bodies of the drug users and the battlefield are so direct for me. It's an echo. And it's heartbreaking to see the lives of these vulnerable people, to see the kind of misery that they go through, and also to just see how that transforms the city as well. The intense stigma they live with, and how they used to be a space which was full of drug users, and periodically there would be raids, and they would be taken to, like, which I've mentioned in the book, they would be taken to a clinic where one of them even managed to recover from his habit of drug use. So it's the city, of course, is a complicated thing, and many, many things are happening within it. I think the key for me writing about Kabul was that I started out writing news or news features. And there is a certain tone, there is a certain kind of subject matter, there is a certain length you write to as a journalist, right? Even when you're writing hopeful stories, you're writing a particular kind of hopeful story. And the longer I spent there, the less interested I was in writing the same stories over and over again, the less interested I was in talking about these things, and more interested in talking about, well, what is it like when you wake up in the morning and you see these beautiful mountains around you, and you can smell the naan being baked in the naan bai's shop, or you can hear snatches of song on a radio when you're walking down the street. What does this make you feel about this place? These were the kind of questions I was interested in getting into. And I think for me, it was key to find a structure that let me do that. And the structure that really opened up these doors for me was the idea of walking, of wandering, of going off the beaten path, of going off the itinerary in a way. Because very often when you write, when you see books on Kabul or on Afghanistan, and this is where I began from, I felt I should cover all the issues, important issues, kya hai, wo sab cover hona chahiye. Otherwise, how will you write about Kabul? And I think the journey for me was to be able to move away from this kind of checklist-based writing, to be able to talk about things that felt emotionally important. And of course, the book is, a lot of it is reportage, but to be able to tell those stories in a way that felt true to the experience of being in the city. This was very central to the idea of the book. And again, this is something I keep coming up against when I talk about Kabul after 2013. How do you sort of keep to the feeling of being in Kabul? And in my case, I was able to spend time with friends I knew from Kabul, but who had moved to Europe, who were living as refugees in Europe. And I spent a lot of time with them. I wrote about them for a magazine later. So in a way, the city has continued to be a part of my work. And in a way, it shifted also even earlier, before this year for me, because so many of my friends left and they started living elsewhere. And the relationship with them was so key to the way I related to the city that, in a way, Kabul had also traveled with them.
No, of course, that's very enlightening. And I'm reminded of the instance where Dr. Sahab leaves the house. I mean, Dr. Sahab always complains about how he does not recognize this place anymore. And he keeps saying that these are not my people and this is not my city. Yet he knows where to find the best biscuits in town. And he always finds a way back to the home that's in his heart, a place that he's familiar to. And I think that truly captures the reality of belongingness, of being part of a country that has betrayed you oftentimes because of different situations, but circumstances, but you still feel like you are a part and you are inseparable, no matter how annoyed you are, how frustrated you are. So, with that, we will get to the final question of this discussion, and we will open the house for questions from the audience. Now, again, we're coming back to the discussion of Kabul as a home. So, we discussed home as an inhabitable yet out of reach place. If we look at your journey from the time when you started writing this book up until this very moment, how much your home or your idea of it has changed? Do you still need a purpose to venture outside the confines of your home? I mean, of course, you belong to Aligarh, and I have lived my fair share of years here. In fact, I'm living here right now. And this is a very, very common question. Why do you need to go outside? I've lived in hostel. So, of course, why do you need to go outside? And the purpose of my going outside is validated by the one asking it and not my own need. So, how has your home changed, and how have you changed?
Yeah, great question. And I'm glad that the idea of having a reason to walk resonated with you. I found that it has resonated with many, many women. In not always in places where you would expect it to. But, this is really where the idea, in a way, fell into place for me, because the whole idea of going out, of being able to inhabit the streets of a city, or of any place which you're visiting, is so central to how we learn about cities. And yet it was something that I had to sort of seize, I had to learn to be able to take. And exactly like you said, growing up in Aligarh, going out was never a simple act. It was always needed a reason. You couldn't just wander around. You couldn't just loiter like my cousins who were boys who could. They could be out for any reason. Most of the day, most of the evening, often into the night. They had no need to provide reasons. And even when I would be out, and this is also true in Delhi and so many other parts, not just Aligarh, but you always sort of needed to show that you had a reason for being there, you had some work, some purpose. So I think this kind of stayed with me. And when I was told in Kabul that you should never walk anywhere, this was not because I'm a woman. It was because I had come to Kabul from elsewhere to work, and even my husband who was with me was given the same advice. But because I had this history of walking, this relationship with walking, this baggage that came with the idea of being told not to walk, it just landed differently for me. And it also made me feel that, this is like a city that maybe I know how to deal with, because it's so familiar, this idea of being told not to walk. And the same resources that I used at home in India, in Delhi, were very much the resources I drew on in Kabul, also to be able to negotiate this whole line between walking and staying home. And I think once this idea kind of grows, it's a very capacious idea. It can take in a lot. And I also think that it's just, it's such a beautiful metaphor for what is it that we feel is important As a woman from India writing about Afghanistan, I was constantly encountering. It's a city that's written about a lot. It's written about in the Western tradition. It's written about by a lot of white men. It's written about by explorers, and it's written about in a certain rich heritage of travel writing. And all of this was interesting to me, but I was also very interested by the other things, which was like, for example, the descriptions of Kabul in the Shahnama, or my own experiences of walking into the library in Kabul, talking to this 80-something-year-old poet who had worked there for over 40 years. And he was just so interesting because he used to, he described himself like, I'm a bird in a cage. If you take me out of here, I will not be able to survive. And he passed away last year, finally. He was a Sufi teacher, he taught poetry, and he was surrounded by manuscripts, old manuscripts, and it was the link between the man and the surroundings was so clear. So, all of this was very interesting to me, and I needed a way to write about it that captured it was very important because I loved the city so much, and the people who had trusted me with their stories was so, I had to find a way to be able to tell this story honestly and to do it good. But at the same time, there is a sense that there are certain important things you talk about. There is a certain way of describing the city. So for me, the journey also involved learning to trust where I had walked, and the places that I had entered, I had walked into, including conversations, including memories. I had to really work to believe that these were stories worth telling. Because my perspective of being an Indian woman in Kabul is so unlike the overarching narrative of the city. And I think this was the biggest, one of the biggest learnings for me was to see myself, my own heritage, my idea of walking, the places I walked into as an asset rather than as some sort of liability or as some sort of thing to be worked around. I think that was a really important learning for me throughout the process. And I'm offering this to you because I assume there are people in this group who are writers or who like to write or who would at some point read a text in this way. And I hope it's helpful to hear that you can trust yourself and you can write the things that seem, the stories that seem valuable to you. So much of writing is really just being lonely, is sitting alone in a room, putting words on paper, hopefully putting words on paper. Very often you don't even do that. But on the good days when you're putting words on paper. And after that is just a leap into this void. I mean, you just have to believe that what you're saying will make sense, will have meaning for other people. And if it's any encouragement, I can tell you that you're not alone in wondering whether it makes sense. And if you feel the story, then go ahead and tell it. Because the book and the story takes on a life of its own. I mean, ever since my book has come out, I had not anticipated listening to people like you, Urusa, and to other people who've read it, who have created from these stories their own stories, who furnished it with their own imaginations. They've said, hame yaad hai, humne ye suna tha, and my cousins had gone to Kabul in the 70s, and so many stories I've heard, and it's grown far beyond anything I could have made from it. So this is my if it helps, I hope hearing this is of some use to the potential writers here. That just trust yourself and write it down.
Absolutely, that was so beautiful. You taking a step towards defiance because you have a sense of responsibility. So you defy what is expected of you, and then you walk through the streets and you walk through people, you walk through their stories, and that ultimately turns into writing and reading. And we are the ones who are carrying the baton from you, and then we are extending this book beyond what you had imagined it to be, beyond what you had. Opening its boundaries, expanding it. So beautiful, and it was great interacting with you. And now I'll have questions from the audience, and then we can move ahead with that.
So are you going to read them from the chat box, or? You walk
Morning,
into-
ma'am.
Hi.
Thank you, ma'am. That was such an interesting session. We'd had so many questions, but due to time restraints, we would be taking 3 or 4 questions. Ma'am, the first question is from Qurratul Ain. She asked that, according to you, in what way will the recent socio-political changes in Afghanistan impact the role of women in the country?
Qurratul Ain, yeah, that's a good question. I don't think anyone knows the answer to that. Like I said, it's a really difficult situation at the moment. What I hear from people I know in Kabul is, of course, it's very challenging. It's also incredibly uncertain. And I think the most important thing, which I feel is my job as a journalist, as a writer, is to continue to pay attention to these voices and to, because the news cycle is so short. We've already seen it being bumped off. I mean, there was maybe a week of intense coverage. Be critical of the coverage you hear. Try to pass it down, like what is the source? How many voices are you hearing which are actually on the ground? How many people are who are speaking are actually speaking to people there? And I would say just, really important for me would be to stay focused, keep listening, and not, there are these waves of amnesia. If you read the book, I talk a lot about Kabul being an amnesiac city. A lot of the history, a lot of what goes on seems to just vanish behind this curtain of forgetting. Sometimes the forgetting is, on its own, and sometimes it's a very deliberate act of amnesia. It's a very political act. And I think importantly for us as people who are engaged, people who are concerned, is to stay engaged with this place and to keep listening to these stories and to keep asking for stories and not to look away, as has happened so many times in the past.
Definitely. Thank you, ma'am. Second question is from Javeria Sajid. And she asked that, among the constant upheaval and peril's journey, what is a memory you still hold close to you today? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, so many, Javeria. It's just, I think what happened interestingly with Kabul was how it sort of came into the everyday lives of my family. And I think one of the most beautiful memories I have is maybe my grandfather would wake up every morning. He would brew himself a pot of green tea. And he had stopped drinking the hamari wali, doodh wali chai. And he said, "Bhai, ab hame ye wali chai nahi chalti, humko green tea la ke do." So, this is, and this is something I was happy to get for him. And I was happy that this little habit, was something that had moved from the city that I love so much, to the life of this man I love so much. And it was this beautiful memory that I always carry. Every time I make myself a cup of green tea, I think of him.
Indeed, many stories of tea for the elites. Ma'am, next question is from Sayyid Imad Hussain. He's, of course, one of our colleagues as well. And he was asking that holding a first-hand experience of the uncertain situation of affairs and etching it into words is a daunting task. What was the biggest challenge you faced?
I think really, I wouldn't call it a challenge so much as a process. Was being able to think about Kabul or writing about Kabul beyond news cycles, and to be able to, like I said, to trust that the stories I had seen were important and they would touch people. And I think beyond that, the thing I spent the longest on was looking for a structure for this book, because I wanted something that would move with the imagination of the reader. I didn't want it to be very prescriptive, if you know what I mean. Like, this is not a book that I wanted to be thought of as maps of explanation, but as a way of exploration, of being able to wander through it, because there's this freedom that comes with getting lost, also. I mean, if you see like a very familiar monument from a different vantage point, from a different road where you've never been, it seems very different to you. And I think there's value to that. And for me, I think the biggest challenge was finding a structure that let me do this. and also to let me move between Kabul, Aligarh, memory, reality, reportage, build all this together and to create all the layers of the city in this one book. This was the biggest challenge I faced as a writer.
Thank you, ma'am. I think due to work time constraints, that would be all from the part of the questions. And thank you very much, ma'am. It was very insightful and interesting to hear from you. I would request one of my colleague, Afia, to come forward and deliver the vote of thanks.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and thank you so much. It's my privilege to present vote of thanks in front of such a wonderful guest of the day, Taran Khan ma'am. Thank you so much, first of all, for accepting our invitation from University Debating and Literary Club. And I would like to inform all of you that it's the wonderful ending of these series. And thank you so much, ma'am. The talk was very enlightening, very informative, and thanks for putting your heart into the talk and session. Thank you so much for being here with us. And I had joined this talk, and thanks for giving us a totally different idea of a city, like cross the border. It was really very wonderful. So thank you so much. And with that, I would like to. We have with us, I think, Professor F.S. Shirani, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for always supporting us, for cooperating with us. We have with us the Fareed ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for being backbone of University Debating and Literary Club. Thanks for the support you have shown to this event. So this is actually a very wonderful ending of this session and the event, one of the prestigious event of University Debating and Literary Club, that too with a very enlightening and wonderful session with Taran Khan ma'am. Thanks to the UDLC technical team, the PR team, all the members. Thanks to the organizers, to the newcomers. For many of the students, this session was the first session in which they have worked in UDLC. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining with us. Thanks to the audience. Thank you so much, ma'am. And thank you so much. See you later.
It was absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. Shirani साहब, आप दिख तो नहीं रहे हैं, मगर thank you very much for inviting me here. और I hope जब आप लोगों के offline events खुलें and when we are able to meet again, I hope to get to see you all in person. And Aligarh is my home. It's my absolute honor to be a part of anything to do with the university. आप लोगों का बहुत-बहुत शुक्रिया कि आपने मुझे बुलाया और सुना मेरी बातें. And happy to talk anytime. And thank you for the questions, sir.
Of course. Thank you so much, ma'am.